what's happening on the ground now. VOA correspondent Carolyn Presutti is joining us from the Trump campaign headquarters in Florida. Also on the broadcast is our correspondent Siddhant Sibul, joining us from Washington, D.C. Carolyn, if I could quickly come to you. About an hour ago, Donald Trump said after casting his vote that he will concede if the elections are fair. Now, the elections were reported to be fair last time in 2020 as well, but Donald Trump did not concede. So how should one read this comment?
Well, I think if he said it on camera, I think voters will hold him to it. If he said that he will concede if the vote is fair. Now, remember, though, he kind of set the seed early on in this campaign, or maybe about 2 weeks ago, he started saying, if we don't win, that means there was fraud involved. So he's already planted that seed in voters' heads. So for him to say that today is good news. In the fact that he may accept the outcome, unlike 4 years ago. So we'll have to wait and see. He did cast his vote about 2 kilometers from where we are. We're actually in front of the Palm Beach County Convention Center. This will be Trump headquarters. Once the votes start coming in after the polls close, this is where Donald Trump, his wife Melania, all his staff, his aides, volunteers, and the media will be inside. We'll bring you all the sights and sounds with what they hope to be a victory party. If indeed Donald Trump has gotten out the votes of the young white males, that's what he says is the key to him winning. The key, though, to getting them to vote is to actually get them out of their houses today, their apartments, their condos, and to the polling place, because this demographic doesn't typically vote. So that's what Donald Trump has been trying to do in the last couple of weeks. He appeared with Joe Rogan on his #1 Spotify podcast, which 80% of his listeners are male. So that was in an attempt to reach those voters. Also, he was on Bill Belichick's podcast, Bill Belichick being a very famous football coach from here in the United States. So he is trying to reach out to those voters. Meantime, Kamala Harris trying to also reach males because she has such an enormous female population. This is the gender gap, right? I mean, it's obvious she's female, he's male. They're going to get male and female votes. Kamala trying to pull the male votes away from Trump. Trump trying to pull the female suburban white moms over to his side. So those are the challenges for these two. We're going to be watching the swing states, specifically Kamala Harris in 5 different cities in just one state, Pennsylvania, yesterday. Trump also in Pennsylvania, but North Carolina ending his bid yesterday in Michigan. So all important states there. There are 7 swing states. Most important is Pennsylvania with 19 electoral votes. So watch when these votes start coming in. The polls close, let's see, in about 5.5 hours here. So watch for those results start coming in. The first ones will be the write-in ballots, the early voters. That's 80 million Americans. I stand corrected, 83 million Americans who've already voted. So those will be the first ones counted.
Absolutely. And speaking of Pennsylvania, we're also hearing that the counting for mail-in and absentee ballots are already underway. It's a crucial state, as you mentioned this time. What's happening in Pennsylvania, if you could deep dive a little there?
So Pennsylvania, we're hoping that we'll have some results tonight, right? But let me look at Pennsylvania first. Pennsylvania changed their laws since 4 years ago. They were criticized a lot by the machine that wanted to say that this was fraudulent, the election, right? So Pennsylvania tightened down on their laws. They could not start counting ballots until 7 this morning. So they're not ahead in the vote count for those early ballots. So they had to start counting at 7. That'll probably last into the wee hours, but they say that their goal is midnight tonight. We'll see if they make it. We hope so. Meantime, Wisconsin also has that same rule where they couldn't start counting the early ballots until 7 this morning. So those are 2 swing states that may be reporting in a little bit late. Now, let me warn your viewers about a couple of things. When we first start seeing these results come in, there could be something called the red mirage. Red being the color for Republicans. So what happened 4 years ago was that when the early voting was tabulated, Trump was ahead. Then when the urban cities, those with more population, were tabulated, which takes longer, right? Then it kind of skewed towards Joe Biden, who then became the president. So just be aware of that. Early results sometimes aren't the end result. So be aware of that. We'll be watching the swing states for you, though, and give you some context on that.
Absolutely. And Carolyn, if I could quickly go back to a very important point you made about the gender divide that we are seeing, how the male voters are kind of siding with Donald Trump and the female voters are increasing going towards Kamala Harris. I was reading a few of the voting intention by age category, and interestingly, I came across this 18 to 29 category where Trump is supported only by 34%, whereas Kamala Harris goes up to 63%. Now, this is the Gen Z category that we have been talking so much about. And we heard Kamala Harris, I don't know how many times, say that she loves the Gen Z. She knows that Gen Z is important. And there has been a visible push towards this category. And it explains 63% towards Harris.
Absolutely. So I must admit, throughout history, right, the younger voter in this country has traditionally been liberal, and that is more in line with the Democratic policies, Democratic views. So that's why Trump is having difficulty reaching this group. And this group, some of them are very much an activist, very much want to come out and vote, where the others say, oh, you know, my vote doesn't count, I don't need to vote, and they're apathetic about the election. So reaching this group on both sides is very important. Get them motivated, get them off the couch today and to the polls if they haven't already voted. Now, Trump doing that with the man, right? That's why I mentioned the Rogan podcast and the Belichick podcast and reaching people on social. But also Harris did that too last week and the week before. So we'll have to see. I think in the future, honestly, in 4 years, we're going to see a different type of outreach. We're becoming a society more ruled by social media. And I think you'll see the candidates then kind of move away from the traditional reaching of voters on network legacy TV stations, legacy radio stations, more to social. And they'll just have to adapt their campaigns that way.
Right. Also, something that I found very interesting was just 2 days before Election Day, a polling from the state of Iowa made headlines, not a swing state. Kamala Harris was leading in a traditionally red state. Carolyn, is this something we could see in other non-swing states as well this time?
Keep in mind that's one poll by a really reputable firm. But if you really dig deep into that poll, not a good enough selection of the population. And that is also what we're facing. Whenever you see a poll, always kind of trace it back, kind of see like the source, see who's conducting the poll, how many people were interviewed, who are those people who were interviewed, and also always follow that back. Sure, it did show Kamala Harris up in that poll, but again, one state, traditionally red. We'll have to see what happens tonight. Now, honestly, I talked to an expert the other day, and I heard them say, look, the polls are so close. That's not really what they show. They just show that no one really knows what's going to happen in this election. So that's one way to look at polls, right?
I've lost count how many times I've heard that in respect to the US elections. Now, could you explain to our viewers as well, when is it that we could actually see the results coming out? When is it that we could paint the US map in red and blue?
7 o'clock is when the East Coast states start to close their polls, right? And that's when you're going to see those early voters, that 83 million across the country, start to trickle in those results. So 7 o'clock is what, in 5.5 hours from now? That's when we'll have a better handle. And remember, in this country, we're very careful about releasing some preliminary data before everyone has a chance to vote, because that would give viewers and listeners the ability to say, well, my vote's not going to count. And we want them to vote. So you really don't want to release that information too early. But I'd say 5.5 hours from now, you'll start seeing state by state.
Right, Callan, if you could just circle back to Donald Trump quickly. He also said something that I found interesting during his recent address to the media. He said, I've done the best campaigning this time among the 3 elections, and all my campaign leaders also agree with me. How do you read that?
I read that as he has crisscrossed the country in every state imaginable. I do not know how either of these candidates do it. I consider myself high energy, but hey, and they're much older. So it's kind of crazy that each one of them, every minute of every day, has been somewhere speaking on radio, speaking to podcasts, speaking in person, rallies, thousands of people out for rallies. Both of them have done a great job. They really have. And I don't know how the voters translate that. We're going to have to just wait and see. But yeah, I tend to agree with him. It has been his best campaign. And obviously, it's been Kamala Harris's best campaign, too. You'll remember she ran for president in 2019 and didn't make it on the final list. So this is truly her first campaign for president.
Caroline, it has been great talking to you. Thank you so much for all those updates from the Trump campaign headquarters in Florida.
My pleasure.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.